Cohen, who will give us words of Torah.
As many of you know, I'm a fifth-year rabbinical student at Hebrew Union College, HUC. In the weeks gearing up to the High Holy Days, HUC can be a bit of a hectic place. Second-year students in a full-blown panic over service outlines. Professors trying to cram in as much knowledge as possible before our nearly month-long break from school. Last-minute tweaks to sermons, packing for the time away from home and our student congregations. It's quite the scene. So last Friday morning, I was feeling pretty prepared to share and experience the High Holy Days here in this community. I had this sermon written and ready. I planned to talk about lies and lying, and I'd spent the last few weeks fixated on the idea. Why do we lie? When is it healthy? When is it not? But I decided to set lying aside for a bit. I was feeling ready for the High Holy Days, and I decided I could treat myself to a lovely, relaxing morning at home. I got up, I made myself a nice breakfast, I hand ground my coffee beans for a fabulous cup of coffee, and I sat down to find a documentary to watch, looking forward to an opportunity to immerse myself in the life of another for just a little while. So I sat down on my couch with my coffee, and I started scrolling through the list of options. And what popped up? A documentary called Little White Lie. Of course, I clicked on it, because how could I not? And I read the description. Lacey Schwartz grew up convinced she was white. She has copper skin, black curls, and full lips, features which distinguish her instantly from her Jewish parents. But it wasn't until she was 18 that she learned the truth. Her biological father was black. 8 years in the making and put together by Lacey herself, Little White Lies tells the compelling story of an uncomfortable, unacknowledged truth. I hit the play button. Lacey grew up understanding herself to be a white Jewish girl from Woodstock, New York, the daughter of Peggy and Robert Schwartz. She remembers as a young child feeling like she looked different, and it was noticeable to the rest of her family. In search of an explanation, who does Lacey look like? Her family went digging and eventually found a picture of her great-grandfather, an Italian Jew. In a worn, black and white, grainy photo, this man from the Mediterranean appeared to have a slightly darker tone to his skin. And with that, there was the explanation for Lacey. The whole family used that photo as their justification. And Lacey would find herself rationalizing. Well, Dad gets really tan in the summer, and Mom's hair is curly like mine. As Lacey narrates, if you look too closely at it, it didn't make sense. So we didn't look. We found ways to see what we wanted to believe. In high school, Lacey began dating a boy whose father was black and mother was white. He really pushed her to start thinking about who she was and where she came from. So these questions began swarming in her head. When it came time to apply to colleges, Lacey fell in love with Georgetown University. On her application, in the space where it asked her to check the appropriate race to describe herself, she left the boxes blank. She just wasn't sure what to say, wasn't sure who she was. In those days, Georgetown required students to submit a photo with their application. Based on Lacey's photo, she was admitted as a black student. She got to campus and was immediately welcomed into the Black Student Alliance. Lacey points out that just like 18 years earlier when a photo of her grandfather made her white, yet again, a single photo had determined her race. But this time, she was black. Lacey continued to explore her identity, and through therapy and lots of conversation with trusted friends, She determined something was off in her family story, and she found the courage to ask about it. Lacey's mother, Peggy, admitted that she'd had an affair with a black man named Rodney. She had met Rodney the year she'd married her husband, the white, nice Jewish boy she was expected to be with, and had continued the affair until 9 years later, Lacey was born. Lacey had grown up knowing Rodney her whole life. For many years, he had been in the ticket business in New York City, and her whole family knew when you needed an in, you go to Rodney. Rodney had been at family functions and a part of big moments, and nobody ever acknowledged out loud that perhaps he was the explanation for the secrets and holes in their family stories. Lacey struggled with this truth. She struggled with what it meant about her identity and about her relationships with her family. But as she struggled, she decided that it was time to talk about it. A lifetime of lies had torn my family apart, she says. I hope that talking about the truth could put it back together. At the end of the documentary, Lacey gets married. She said she put a lot of thought into changing her name. As a kid, she didn't like her last name, but as an adult, it really felt right. Schwartz, a clearly Jewish name that literally means black. A week ago, I fully intended to stand here and speak with you about lies and when they're healthy and when they're not. And that's an important conversation. But that's the next conversation. Before we can determine anything about the nature of lies, we need to understand and be comfortable with the notion that we can hold multiple truths at once. In Lacey's story, there is a clear lie. And sometimes as a consequence of that lie, and sometimes just as a consequence of living, there are also many truths. Lacey holds many truths about who she is at the exact same time, embodied so beautifully by a renewed connection to her last name, which embraces the multiple truths of her identity. This morning, instead of lies, I want to talk about truths. Truths in the plural, because there are often many, and they don't always play nicely together or fit neatly into one package, but there still are truths. And though we may try to ignore or silence, our truths will always come knocking at the doors of our soul. The Talmud is filled with debates between the two great houses of Hillel and Shammai. Though there is nothing new or remarkable about them disagreeing and going back and forth on different issues, we do have a somewhat unique debate between them in Tractate Ketubot. As we seek to understand this debate in our context this morning, I'd ask that we temporarily put issues of the objectification of women and other modern readings of the text aside to be able to understand its core ideology. So here in the Talmud, we find Hillel and Shammai questioning what attendees at a wedding should say when dancing in the presence of the bride. The house of Hillel says that you should say the same thing at every wedding with every bride. What a beautiful and graceful bride. Always in disagreement, the house of Shammai questions this blanket statement. But what if the bride is lame or blind, he says? Will you still say, what a beautiful and graceful bride? Shammai continues, citing Exodus, saying, doesn't the Torah command stay away from falsehood? The house of Shammai concludes that there should be no standard formula for this situation, and that each bride should be described accurately as she is. So whose position is accepted into Jewish law? Hillel. A hint for those who may not be familiar with Talmudic discourse, Hillel always wins. We accept Hillel's position as Jewish law, yes, because one should praise the beauty of all brides, but even more so, that whether or not she may be beautiful to you, the bride is certain to appear beautiful in the eyes of her groom. Rabbi Erwin Kula, the president of the National Jewish Center for Learning Leadership, offers further context on this Talmudic debate. He says that the fatal weakness in Shammai's rationale was that his conception of truth was too narrow. Shammai believed the truth to be objective. The bride is either beautiful or she is not beautiful. Hillel, on the other hand, understood that truth is complex. Truth can be in the multiple, and truth is often contextual. Shammai's solution to this dilemma can not only cause hurt and pain, but arguably, it is actually less truthful than Hillel, because the beauty of the bride is subjective, and there is no one truth. Truth is complicated, and truth is multifaceted. There can be more than one truth existing simultaneously. And being able to hold in our hands two truths, to maintain two perspectives at the same time in the same place, is actually very, very Jewish. In Judaism, very rarely do we have something that is all of one thing. Let's stick with weddings, for example. We are taught of the mitzvah of celebrating and rejoicing with the newly married couple. And a Jewish wedding is just that. It's a collection of rituals and customs meant to respect the marriage being created and to celebrate a couple's commitment of love and devotion. And at a Jewish wedding, we break a glass. There are many, many reasons and interpretations for why we do this. It's about the fragility of a marriage, or about remembering the destruction of the temple, or about the brokenness that exists in the world. And in all of these explanations, we have one core theme. In this, one of the happiest moments in the couple's collective lives, there is a hint of something that is not about joy or celebration or love. Our tradition demands that in this moment, which may feel perfect and magical, we recognize that there is something else, that not even a wedding, all joy, all of one thing. Two things can exist at once. Two things can be true to you at the same time. On July 8th of this year, my bubby, my grandmother, passed. She and I were very close. I spoke to her at least once a day to tell her what I bought at the grocery store, to hear the drama from her assisted living, to read her the sermon I'd be giving on a Friday night. When she died, we were shocked. While she was just shy of 96 years old, she was in perfect health. I talked to her at 8 p.m. She got off the phone with her best friend at 9:30. And by 11 o'clock, there were EMTs in her apartment, and she'd already had a massive stroke and left us. I miss my bubby every day, and I am so sad that I am living in a world without her. And I am so deeply grateful that she died when she did. That she didn't suffer, that she wasn't afraid, that she lived 95 and a half years of health and happiness and died in an hour and a half. I am so very sad, and I am so very grateful. These are my truths. It would be easier to invest all of our energy in one feeling, into one truth. But that's not being true to our own truths. Being Jewish is about holding two truths at once. And this may be two sides of the same truth or two different things entirely. And it is all complex and theoretical and can be difficult to grasp, which is part of why Judaism is often so frustrating, demanding, and difficult, and also why Judaism is often so exciting, rewarding, and beautifully challenging. The Hebrew word for truth is emet, aleph, mem, tav. These three letters are the first, the middle, and the last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. In contrast, the Hebrew word for falsehood is made of three letters that appear one after another in the alphabet. There's a Jewish teaching that tells us that this is because truth creates a firm foundation. It gives us a place to stand, whereas falsehood is unstable, for its base is too narrow. Emet, truth, literally embraces the whole alphabet. It is in every letter, which makes every word. And in each of those letters, in each of those words, our truth looks different. Our truths look different. This year in 5779, may we find our own truths, however many. May we open ourselves to them and not shy away. May we find comfort in reaching out our arms, opening our hands, and holding two things at once. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will.
She speaks the truth.